Some houses keep memories. Some memories refuse to stay buried. Welcome to Briarwood Reads. Tonight's story is The House on Briarwood Lane, a psychological mystery about identity, betrayal, and the dangerous things we do to survive ourselves. As you listen, I invite you to slow down. Let the silences speak. And ask yourself how much of who we are is built on what we choose to remember, and what we choose to forget. If you enjoy immersive, first-person storytelling like this, take a moment to subscribe to Briarwood Reads, like the video, and comment below with your thoughts as the story unfolds. Now, step inside. The house has been waiting. I didn't unlock the front door of the house on Briarwood Lane so much as I surrendered to it. The key was warm in my hand, though it had been sitting in my pocket the entire drive. I remember thinking that was strange, heat without a source, but I told myself it was nerves. Everything felt like nerves lately. Grief had a way of disguising itself as other sensations: heat, pressure, dizziness, the feeling that you were being watched even when you weren't. The door opened on the first try. That should have unsettled me more than it did. The house smelled exactly the same. Lemon oil, dust, and something faintly metallic underneath, like old pipes or pennies pressed into skin. The air felt thick, unmoving, as though it had been waiting years for me to return before it could circulate again. I stood in the doorway longer than necessary, my suitcase still at my feet, my hand resting on the doorframe where my height had once been measured in pencil marks. They were still there. Faded, but visible. Claire, 8. Claire, 11. Claire, 15. No mark beyond that. I hadn't noticed before that my growth had apparently stopped at 15. Or maybe someone had stopped measuring. The house didn't creak the way houses do in movies. It didn't announce my presence or complain under my weight. It simply accepted me, the way something does when it's certain you belong to it. My mother was gone. That fact felt theoretical, like something I'd read rather than lived. Sudden heart failure, the doctor said. Peaceful. As if that word could soften the violence of finality. As if peace were something she had ever been comfortable with. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The sound was definitive. Too definitive. A full stop at the end of a sentence I hadn't finished writing. I hadn't planned to move back here. I told people that when they asked, which they did in the careful, hovering way people ask questions after a death. I said it was temporary. Just until the estate was settled. Just until I figured out what to do with the house. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit: the house had called me back. I dropped my suitcase in the entryway and walked into the living room. The furniture was untouched, preserved like an exhibit. Couch pillows still arranged the way my mother insisted they be, sharp corners facing outward. The coffee table bore a faint ring from a mug she must have set down years ago, before she stopped drinking coffee altogether. I ran my fingers along the mantel. Dust bloomed under my touch. You could have cleaned, I muttered, then felt foolish for saying anything at all. The house didn't need commentary. It already knew me. It knew the sound of my voice. The fireplace was cold, but when I looked into it, I felt a strange pull, like standing too close to a ledge. I stepped back quickly, my heart racing, annoyed with myself. You're tired, I thought. That's all this is. Still, the feeling lingered, that I wasn't alone, that I was the last to arrive at a gathering already in progress. I went upstairs slowly, each step deliberate. The staircase railing fit my palm perfectly, worn smooth by years of my hands sliding along it. Muscle memory. The body remembering what the mind pretended not to. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out before me, doors on either side like closed eyes. My old bedroom was on the left. My mother's room at the end. And on the right. I stopped. The third door on the right was closed. It had always been closed. Even when I lived here. Especially then. I looked away before I could think about why. Instead, I went into my old bedroom. The bed was still made, the quilt tucked tight, floral and faded. The desk by the window remained where it had always been, its surface bare except for a small dent near the corner. I traced it with my thumb. I couldn't remember how it got there. That should have bothered me more than it did. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sighing softly under my weight, and for the first time since the phone call telling me my mother was dead, I felt something like certainty. The house hadn't forgotten me. The question was whether I had forgotten myself. I waited until morning to go through my mother's things. Not out of respect. Out of fear. Daylight made the house feel less sentient, less watchful. Shadows retreated into corners, and the silence softened, no longer pressing so hard against my ears. I made coffee in a kitchen that still remembered where everything belonged, even when I didn't. My mother's mug sat drying by the sink. White ceramic. Hairline crack along the handle. I picked it up before I could stop myself. It fit my hand the way the railing had. I set it down quickly. Her bedroom was immaculate. Not staged, lived in, but controlled. The bed was made with military precision, hospital corners tucked so tightly they looked painful. Her closet doors were open, revealing rows of clothes arranged by color, dark to light. She had always believed order could keep chaos out. I started with the dresser. Socks folded into perfect rectangles. Scarves rolled instead of draped. Jewelry laid out in a velvet tray, each piece occupying its own space, never touching another. There were gaps. Not empty drawers, intentional spaces. Places where something had been removed carefully enough to leave no trace, but not carefully enough to avoid drawing attention to the absence. I frowned, my journalist's instincts stirring despite my efforts to keep them buried. Absence was data. Negative space told a story if you knew how to read it. I opened the nightstand. Books. A pair of reading glasses. A small notebook. My breath caught. The notebook was thin, unassuming. No label on the cover. I opened it slowly, half expecting it to be blank. It wasn't. The pages were filled with dates and short entries, my mother's handwriting precise and controlled. Observations. Appointments. Weather notes. Mundane details recorded with obsessive consistency. Until the last few pages. The handwriting changed there, not dramatically, but enough. Tighter. Pressed harder into the paper. Claire seems calmer today. No questions. She didn't go upstairs. I turned the page. I think it's holding. Holding what? My pulse thudded in my ears. I flipped through the remaining pages, but there were no more entries. Just blank paper. She had stopped writing abruptly. As if something had been concluded. Or decided. I closed the notebook and sat heavily on the bed, the room suddenly too small. This wasn't grief, I realized. This was something else. Something sharp and investigative and unwelcome. I moved to the closet, my movements mechanical now. I checked coat pockets, shoeboxes, the top shelf where old purses were stored. I found receipts dating back decades. Warranty manuals. Instruction booklets for appliances she no longer owned. But no letters. No journals beyond the notebook. No confessions. My mother had curated her life the way she curated her belongings. Anything dangerous had been removed. Or hidden better. I carried a box of her things into the hallway, intending to take it downstairs, when something slipped out and fell to the floor. An envelope. It was unmarked. No stamp. No address. Just my name. Written in my handwriting. I stared at it, my skin prickling, a cold wave rolling through me. I knew my handwriting. I'd hated it most of my life, too angular, too forceful, like I was always trying to convince the page of something. I hadn't written anything by hand in years, not since I'd left journalism behind. But this was unmistakably mine. I bent down slowly, as though sudden movement might make it disappear. My fingers hovered over the envelope before finally closing around it. The paper felt old. Worn. As if it had been handled many times. I didn't open it yet. Some instinct, self-preservation, maybe, told me that once I did, something irreversible would begin. Down the hallway, the closed door on the right seemed to watch me. I stood there for a long moment, envelope clutched to my chest, surrounded by my mother's carefully ordered life and the glaring spaces where truth had been removed. Whatever was happening here hadn't started with her death. It had started long before. And somehow, impossibly, it had started with me. I didn't open the envelope right away. I carried it downstairs with me, holding it carefully between two fingers as if it were contaminated. The house felt different now, alert, almost expectant. Floorboards seemed to listen. The walls pressed in just enough to make breathing feel like a conscious act. I set the envelope on the kitchen table and walked away from it. That was my first mistake. I busied myself with meaningless tasks. I rinsed an already clean mug. I wiped down counters that didn't need wiping. I stood at the sink and watched the gray winter light slide across the linoleum, counting my breaths, trying to convince myself this was nothing. It worked. For almost 10 minutes. Then I realized I was arranging my movements around the table, careful not to turn my back on it. As though the envelope might do something if I wasn't watching. "Get a grip," I said aloud. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet kitchen. Too solid. I sat down and pulled the envelope toward me. Up close, the details were impossible to ignore. The slight slant to the right. The way the capital C in my name hooked sharply at the end, like it was bracing itself. I slid my finger under the flap and opened it. The paper inside was folded once. Neatly. Intentionally. I unfolded it and felt the room tilt. "You promised you wouldn't forget this time." That was the first line. No greeting. No signature. Just an accusation written in ink I recognized as my own. My stomach clenched. I read it again, slower this time, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less personal. They didn't. "You promised you wouldn't forget this time. If you're reading this, it means you did anyway. I'm sorry. I know you thought this was the only way." My hands were shaking now, the paper trembling softly with each breath. Thought what was the only way? The letter continued. "You need to stop pretending this house is just a house. You need to stop pretending she didn't know. Go upstairs. Open the door. You said if it came to this, you'd be brave enough." I pressed the paper flat against the table, my palms splayed over the words like I could smother them into silence. This wasn't a prank. It couldn't be. No one else knew about the promise I had, or hadn't, made. No one else knew the way my thoughts circled danger, how I compartmentalized fear until it became manageable. I knew how gaslighting worked. I'd written exposés about it once, back when I still believed truth could be excavated cleanly. This felt different. This wasn't someone rewriting my reality. This was someone reminding me of it. The final line sat alone at the bottom of the page. You wrote these letters to protect yourself. I laughed then. A short, sharp sound that startled me with its hysteria. Protect myself from what? I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. My heart was racing, but beneath the fear was something else, a spark of grim recognition. I trusted this handwriting. That was the most terrifying part. I stood up and looked toward the staircase. The hallway above felt suddenly closer, the closed door on the right pressing against my awareness like a bruise. Not yet, I whispered, unsure who I was speaking to. The house did not argue. I spent the rest of the day trying to disprove myself. That's how I framed it, anyway. Not denial, investigation. I searched for rational explanations because that was what I'd always done best. Stress. Grief. Dissociation. Some kind of delayed psychological response to my mother's death. I even Googled it. Handwriting amnesia. Dissociative fugue. False memory syndrome. The words blurred together on the screen, clinical and distant. None of them accounted for the specificity of the letter. The intimacy. The way it spoke to me rather than about me. I closed my laptop and leaned back in the chair, rubbing my eyes. When I lowered my hands, I noticed something I hadn't before. A faint smudge of ink on the side of my index finger. My breath caught. It was small, easily overlooked. The kind of mark you get when you've been writing for a long time, when the pen rests against your skin and leaves its residue behind. I scrubbed at it with my thumb. It didn't come off. My heart began to pound, a dull, insistent rhythm. I stood and went to the bathroom, turning on the light too fast, half expecting not to recognize the face in the mirror. But it was me. Paler than I remembered. Older. Lines around my eyes that spoke of nights spent not sleeping, of thoughts looping endlessly. I held my hand up, turning it this way and that under the fluorescent light. The ink was real. Okay, I said softly. Okay. I sounded like someone calming a child. Or an animal. I washed my hands thoroughly, soap foaming between my fingers, water hot enough to sting. The ink faded but didn't disappear completely, lingering like a shadow beneath the skin. Ink under my skin. The phrase surfaced unbidden, and with it a memory that wasn't quite a memory, more like a sensation. Sitting at a desk. Late at night. The house silent except for the hum of electricity. Writing and rewriting the same sentences over and over, trying to get them exactly right. Trying to say something without saying it. I backed away from the sink, my reflection watching me with an expression I didn't trust. That night, I dreamed of the house breathing. Walls expanding and contracting, doors opening and closing on their own. I dreamed of my mother standing at the top of the stairs, her face turned away from me, saying nothing. And I dreamed of myself at 15, standing in the hallway, staring at the closed door on the right. When I woke, my heart was racing, the sheets twisted around my legs. Morning light filtered through the curtains, dull and gray. For a moment, I thought the letter had been a dream. Then I saw it. Another envelope sat on the nightstand. Unmarked. Unstamped. My handwriting. This one was already open. I left the house that morning because staying felt dangerous. The second letter remained unopened on the nightstand, its presence a pressure point I couldn't bring myself to touch. I told myself I needed air, perspective, motion, anything to interrupt the looping thoughts tightening in my head. Briarwood Lane looked exactly as it had when I was a child. That was the first lie. The trees were taller. The paint on the houses was newer. Cars I didn't recognize lined the curbs. And yet the street carried itself the same way it always had, quiet, watchful, insulated from the rest of the world by a shared agreement not to ask questions. As I walked, I felt eyes on me. Curtains shifted. A garage door paused halfway down, then continued. Recognition flickered across faces that tried to hide it quickly enough not to be rude. They knew me. Not as I was now, but as I had been. Or as I had done. I stopped in front of the house across the street, the one with the white fence that had always leaned slightly to the left. I remembered sitting on the curb there once, knees scraped, crying hard enough to make my chest hurt. I couldn't remember why. A woman stepped out onto the porch, adjusting a cardigan around her shoulders. Her hair was gray now, her posture more tentative, but her face. "Claire Bennett," she said. It wasn't a question. "Mrs. Adler," I replied automatically, the name surfacing without effort. Muscle memory again. Hi. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze searched my face, lingering a beat too long, as though checking for signs of something specific. "You're back," she said. "Yes. My mother passed away." I heard. A pause. "I'm sorry." I waited for her to ask how I was. She didn't. Instead, she said, "You look well." Another lie. "Thank you," I said, because that was what the version of me she remembered would have said. She hesitated, then added, "If you need anything, well, you know where I am." I nodded, already stepping back, the conversation complete in a way that left too much unsaid. As I continued down the street, fragments surfaced. Laughter echoing from somewhere behind me. The sound of running feet. A voice, my own, younger, sharper, saying, "Don't tell anyone." Not yet. I stopped walking. The sensation passed quickly, like a wave retreating before I could brace myself. I exhaled slowly and kept moving, my steps carrying me toward the small cluster of shops at the end of the lane. The coffee shop was still there, renamed but unchanged in spirit. I went inside, ordered a drink I didn't really want, and took a seat by the window. That's when I saw him. He stood across the street, pretending to study the menu posted outside the bakery. His hair was darker than I remembered, his shoulders broader, but his posture, slightly hunched, like he was always apologizing for taking up space, was unmistakable. Ethan Marsh. One of my childhood friends. My chest tightened. He hadn't seen me yet. I could leave. Slip out the back, avoid the conversation, preserve whatever fragile equilibrium I still had. Instead, I raised my hand and tapped on the glass. He turned. Recognition hit him like a physical force. His face drained of color, then flushed, a dozen emotions crossing his features in rapid succession. Surprise. Relief. And fear. He crossed the street slowly, each step measured, like he was approaching something that might explode if mishandled. When he reached the door, he paused, his hand hovering over the handle. Then he came in. "Claire," he said. "Ethan." We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving to hug the other. The past stretched between us, heavy and unspoken. "You look good," he said finally. "Liar," I replied, and his mouth twitched despite himself. We sat. Talked about nothing. Work. Weather. The neighborhood. Every sentence carefully neutral, every word chosen to avoid the center of the conversation like it was a sinkhole. Finally, I said, "You're afraid of me." He looked down at his cup. "I'm afraid for you," he corrected softly. That was worse. Ethan and I walked together after coffee, the silence between us no longer awkward, just dense. "You didn't come to the funeral," I said, not accusing. Observing. He nodded. "I didn't think it would be good for either of us. For me, or for you." He stopped walking. I took a few more steps before realizing he wasn't beside me anymore. I turned back. He stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at the pavement. "You don't remember," he said. It wasn't a question. My throat tightened. "Remember what?" He looked up then, and whatever he saw in my face made his shoulders sag. "They said you might not," he murmured. "They?" My pulse quickened. "Who is they?" Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture so familiar it hurt. "Claire, I don't know what you've been told. Or what you told yourself. But you asked us not to bring it up unless you did first." "Bring what up?" He exhaled slowly. "The night." The word landed between us like a dropped plate, shattering on impact. "What night?" "The one where everything changed." I felt suddenly cold, despite the mild afternoon. "You're going to have to be more specific." Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. "I can't. Not like this." "Why not?" "Because last time you started remembering, it nearly destroyed you." My heart pounded. "And whose decision was it to make me forget?" He met my eyes. "Yours." The streets seemed to tilt, the houses leaning in, listening. "That's not possible," I said. "It is when you're very good at convincing people," he replied. "And yourself." I thought of the letters. The ink. The promise I couldn't remember making. Did I hurt someone? I asked quietly. Ethan flinched. That was answer enough. Before I could press him further, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me, something like regret settling into his features. "Daniel knows you're back," he said. My stomach dropped. "My ex-husband?" "He's been worried," Ethan said carefully. "About what would happen if you came home." "Did he know?" I asked. Ethan nodded. "More than anyone." A familiar name wrapped itself around my chest like wire. Daniel. The man who had once loved me, and apparently knew exactly what I was capable of forgetting.